Now, as you know, physical education is the integrated study of multiple aspects and science behind sports. I will give you a brief bird's eye view on the whole concept. So, if your BMI is proper, that is your body to height ratio, explosive strength is the sudden burst power that you release when you take off. So, it is important for you to understand anatomy in order to understand the joint structure and different kind of bones and different kind of other relation to that in the whole structuring or the functioning of the body. Hello all. My name is Rohit. I take physical education on behalf of Prep School by Vidhyaashram. In today's class, we will cover the first session of physiology and injuries in sports. Now, when you talk about physiology, it's the functioning of the body. So why do we have a chapter called as physiology and injuries in sports, which is two different aspects or two different topics. Now, when you talk about injuries, injuries can be related to anatomy and injuries can be related to physiology. So giving you a glimpse of anatomy and physiology in the body will help you to understand the injuries related to that even more better. So that's why there is an integrated chapter called as physiology and injuries in sports. Because in order to give any kind of first aid or any kind of treatment to any kind of wound that happened on the field, it's important for you to understand the anatomy and physiology of the body. That's why the integrated chapter called as physiology and injuries in sports is there in your syllabus. Now, having given the glimpse of the whole chapter, being this the first session of the chapter, let's move on to the session overview, in which we will try to understand what all things we will be studying in this session from the chapter physiology and injuries in sports. So in this session, we will study about the concept of physiology, where we will try to understand what do you mean by physiology. Then we will study about anatomy, where we will see what do you mean by anatomy and what is the importance of that and what is the relevance of knowing about it. Then we will see physiological factors, where various kind of physiological factors will come into play, such as strength, speed, endurance and flexibility. We will look into each one of them and we will see what all factors are responsible for those fitness related components. So let's start off with our first topic in today's session, that is physiology. So what do you mean by physiology and what do you mean by anatomy? How both of them are different? We will get to anatomy later when the anatomy part comes, but for now let's stick on with physiology. So what do you mean by physiology? Just like a body has different parts and each of them has different functions, just like that the human body study also is divided. So you have a hand, so you have a heart, so you have a lungs and different other parts in your body. So how does it look like? That is called as anatomy, and how does it function? That is called as physiology. So physiology is what? Physiology is the functioning of your body, how your body functions, right? So when you take in the oxygen, how the whole process of respiration and then the further process related to that gets into play. When you eat food, how does the complex compounds get converted into simpler compounds and is taken up by your body? That process will fall under physiology. How your heart functions, how your lungs functions, how your kidney filters, how your endocrine system functions, all of those functions, all of your neural functions, all of those functions will fall under the physiological part of your body. So it is important for your body to stay fit physiologically and anatomically. That's why anatomical and physiological fitness all together will conclude as the physical fitness. Now, why the study of physiology is important in sports and in physical education? Now, as you know, physical education is the integrated study of multiple aspects and science behind sports. It is perfectly clear and understandable that it is important for a sports person to know his or her physiology and anatomy in order to play safe and in order to be safe on the field. So, if you know about the anatomical biomechanics or if you know about the physiological functioning of your body, it will give you a perspective of different kind of safety measures that you have to take during the practice of the sports. Now, when you practice sports, in football also there are certain dives. In cricket also, when you field, you have certain kind of dives. You might have seen in the sports channels, or you might have seen in any kind of cricket match or any kind of tournaments, or if you are a sportsman yourself, you might have practices. And how all those dives are developed? Now, all those dives are developed based on the physiology and functioning of the body. So in order for a sportsman to fall without any kind of injury and yet achieve the skill that is required in that sports, it is important for that sports person to understand the physiology and anatomy of the body. So suppose this is my hand and I can move and flex my hand towards this angle, and since I know that I cannot flex my hand backwards, that will give me the understanding that if I fall in a way of backward flex, that could break my arm. So understanding the biomechanics of the body will help you to resolve or help you to prevent from any kind of injuries that is related to sports. So that is why it is important for sportsmen or athlete who is on the field to understand the anatomy and physiology of the body. Now let's focus more on the physiology rather than anatomy, because we have a separate section just dealing with anatomy. So let's just stick on with physiology. So physiological part, like I said, it all is connected with the anatomy also. Now why did I explain both of them together? Because it's an interlinking circle. All of your body parts and components are interlinked, and the functioning of that works in a change. Just like you have a gear system, if one of the gear is not working in the whole mechanical system, automatically the whole system fails. Just like that, even if one component or one anatomical component of your body fails, it affects the physiology of the body itself. So that is why it is important for both of them to stay in sync. Now getting back to the importance of physiology. Why physiology is important? Physiology is important again to build up your body from inside. Now many people have this misconception in their mind that physical fitness means just looking okay and just looking good from the outside. But it is important for you to know that the physiological fitness also matters. The functioning of your heart and various other organs also is important to maintain the fitness of the body. Now you may have encountered many situations, or you might have read or seen many cases where a perfectly fit sportsman or athlete fell sick just because of some physiological problem or internal damage. And you might have got shocked, how come that person became sick? He never looked unfit or he never looked unwell. He was so fit. You judge that based on the way he looked. But the fact is that he was not internally or he was not physiologically fit. So the functioning of the body equally plays part when it comes to fitness. Now the physiological fitness in your body, like I have said in many instances in the previous chapters and in the previous classes, is totally dependent on multiple factors, like the food that you eat, like the lifestyle that you follow. All those things will be again a major factor for the physiological fitness. So if you don't eat proper and if you don't consume the necessary nutrients, macro and micronutrients required by your body, automatically your body will fall sick and it will cause many kind of physiological damages. So it is important for you to maintain the physiological fitness by having a proper diet and by following a proper daily active lifestyle rather than having a passive lifestyle. Okay, so that was the relevance and importance of physiological fitness and why you should have that and why we should give it a preference and significance in the study of physical education. So by now it might be clear to you how it is important for a sportsman to understand the physiology of a human body. Now having given the idea of physiology and its relation with the anatomy, let's move on with the anatomical structure now. Now what do you mean by anatomy? Anatomy is the structural part of your body. The way it looks, how does your heart look, how does your kidney look, the shape of that, the structure of that, your torso structure, your body shape, all those things will fall under the anatomical part of the body. Now there are certain factors and various other components or factors that are responsible for your anatomical structure. One of it could be the genetics itself. So the way I look or the way you look will be totally different when it comes to the structure of the body or the structure of the skeletal system, since it is adapted from the genetics that you carry. So everybody will have a separate set of anatomical structure, but there are certain common things which everybody will be having the same. The structure of the heart, the structure of the lungs, all of those things, the structural part of that will be the same for everybody. Now what is the relevance of anatomy in sports? Why are we studying anatomy in sports? Why are we studying anatomy in physical education? What is the relevance of that? Like I said, anatomy is the structural part of the body. What relevance does it have? Like I talked about biomechanics earlier, we will also have a chapter called as biomechanics where we will study about the biomechanics in sports. But now since anatomy is related to biomechanics, I will give you a brief bird's eye view on the whole concept. Now there are certain angular movements in our body. There are different kind of joints in our body. Each joint have a certain kind of angular movement. Some of them will have a rotatory movement, just like we have ball socket joints. All those things will have a rotatory movement, and some other joints in our body will have an angular movement. That means only to certain angle you could flex or you could move that or you can extend that particular joint or particular part of the body. Now talking about anatomy, you might have studied this in biology about your skeletal system. Your skeletal system is comprising of multiple types of bones and multiple different kind of joints. Now each of the bones will have a separate characteristics and then each of the joints will also have the same. Now depending on a person's genetics or a person's anatomical structure, every person will have a separate ratio of bone density. The bones are comprised of calcium, phosphorus and various other elements that are involved in it. The density of your bone marrow, the density of your outer shell, that is the calcium phosphorus composition, all those things will differ from person to person. Now, it is important for you to understand your body and for you to understand the deficiency that you're having so that you can treat it better, or you can improve and you can treat it. Now, the treatment and the improvement in that is only possible if you know the deficiency. If you don't know, you don't know how to treat it. Just like that, when you talk about the sports injuries, it is important for you to know the anatomy, the biomechanics of a human body, the movement of different bones in the human body, and its angular movement and its rotational movement based on what kind of joint are we talking about. So if you don't know the biomechanics, you would never know how to fix a cracked bone, or you would never know how to pop back a bone that is out of the socket because of any kind of wrong falls. So on field, it is important for you to have a basic biomechanics knowledge or the anatomical knowledge in order to protect yourself from any kind of major injuries. So people who have such knowledge will be away from many dangers, and people who lack such kind of knowledge will fall under many kind of situations where they wouldn't know what to do, and they will fall under many kind of injuries, and they will cause themselves many kind of troubles and medical issues. So to avoid that, it is important to know the anatomy. So I hope you understood what is anatomy and physiology. Once again repeating, what is anatomy? Anatomy is the structural part of your body, and physiology is the functional part of your body. What is it? Anatomy is the structural part of your body and physiology is the functional part of your body. Structural part means the way it looks, functional part means the way it functions. Having given the in-depth meaning of anatomy and physiology and also the analysis and the relevance of that in sports and physical education, let's move on to our next topic in the session, that is physical factors determining the strength of a human body, or in this case an athlete. So what are the components? What are the components that is responsible for the strength of an athlete or the strength of a student? So what all factors are responsible for strength in a human body? First is the size of the muscle. So whichever muscle in your body you're putting the tension on, what is the density of that? What is the power of that? What is the size of that? That will again determine how powerful and how strong those muscles are. Second is body weight. Now, why body weight is important? If you go back to your physics class a bit, you will know the relevance of gravitation on the mass of the object. Here the object we are talking about is the human body. So if you are lifting something, okay, if you are lifting something, it is important for you to have a strong balance on the ground. If you don't have enough body weight compared to your height, that is called as BMI. You might have studied about BMI also, that is body mass index, that determines how much weight a person should have according to that person's gender, age and height. So if your BMI is proper, that is your body to height ratio, then automatically your body will be more strong, or at least you could use the strength of your muscles properly if your body weight is proper. So suppose if your muscles are strong, suppose if your arm strength or if your shoulder muscles are strong or your wrist muscles are strong, you're trying to lift something, automatically if your body weight is not proper enough, what will happen is that you will lose your balance. Okay, so what will happen? You will lose your balance and you will not be able to lift that heavy weight that you're trying to carry. So just like the size of the muscle, the body weight also determines the strength of a person. Next, you have muscle composition. We are talking about what all things are the muscles composed of. You might have studied about fast twitch muscles and you might have studied about slow twitch muscles, right? So the composition of that, the ratio of that will determine the strength of a person. So what all things are there? We have muscle composition, body weight and size of the muscle till now that we studied. Now we have the intensity of the nerve impulse. Now we are talking about neuromuscular coordination. How fast does your body react to a particular thing? How fast does your muscle react? Your reflex, that is what we are talking about when you talk about nerve impulse. So we have 4 different categories or 4 different factors that is responsible for determining strength. First we have size of the muscle, then we have body weight, then we have muscle composition, and then we have intensity of nerve impulse. What are the things? Size of the muscle, that means how big the muscles are. Next, the body weight, what weight do you carry? Then you have muscle composition, what all are your muscle composed of? What is the ratio of your muscle? Next, you have muscle composition, which will determine the ratio of fast twitch and slow twitch muscles. Then you have intensity of nerve impulse, which determines your neuromuscular coordination, how sharp you are, what kind of reflex that you hold. Okay, so these are some of the factors that are responsible for the strength of a human body. Okay, so now let's move on to our next topic, that is physical factors determining speed. So what are the different factors that is responsible for speed? So what is the first one? Mobility of the nervous system. Now when you talk about mobility of nervous system, we are talking about different neural activities. How fast does the body calculate when you run, when you quickly change your pace, when you suddenly slow down, when you calculate different kind of strategies and patterns of running to achieve a certain goal on the field. That shows the neural activity, and that shows the speed of calculation and speed of different tactics that is going in your brain. Okay, so the mobility of your nervous system, mobility of different kind of neural activity in your mind, that is equally important when you talk about the factors that is determining the speed. So what is the first factor that determines the speed of a person? The mobility of the neural system or the mobility of the nervous system. Second, you have muscle composition. Now muscle composition also was a factor for strength. Muscle composition also is a factor for speed. Now automatically what happens is that when you run, you have both your hands swinging with you, right? So that itself gives you a momentum when you run. So if you have a stronger muscle, if you have a stronger thigh muscles or calf muscles, your legs will not be tired, you will not feel fatigued. So automatically when you don't feel fatigue, your endurance will be wrong and your running power also will increase. Your explosive strength and your burst power will be more. So that's how the muscle composition will help you to determine the speed. So like I said, what all things gets involved in the muscle composition? We have different kind of fibers, that is slow twitch fibers and fast twitch fibers. So the composition of that and the ratio of that determines the muscle composition, and in turn that serves as the factor for the speed of the body. Next, you have explosive strength. Like I said, when you take off, when you run, when you do a sprint, when you take off, when you give a explosive sudden strength, or when you give a burst strength at the starting pace, that is called as explosive strength. So what is explosive strength? Explosive strength is the sudden burst power that you release when you take off and when you do a sprint. So initially that power you release when you take off, that is called as explosive strength. But as you run forward, you decrease that explosive strength, and if your body switches back to the endurance, and the stress on the muscle decreases as you already have the momentum and the inertia that you took off with, that serves at the initial stage of the race, and that is how explosive strength determines the speed of the person. Next, you have flexibility. Now when you talk about flexibility, the best practice to improve the flexibility in your body is practicing yoga. That is the one-stop solution for improving the flexibility in your body. But when you take flexibility as a factor for speed, how does it help? Now when you talk about flexibility, when you talk about running, the longer steps you take and the faster you take, that will make you run faster and go ahead of everybody else. So taking longer steps, you need the flexibility. Okay, so the flexibility in your limbs has to be very good in order to flex longer and in order to take a longer step. So automatically when the flexibility of your body is high, what will happen? You will take a longer step, you will run faster, and automatically the speed will be increased as a result of that. Next, you have biochemical reserves and metabolic power. Now we are talking about the reserve energy in your body. So we have two different sources of energy when we talk about nutrition, or when we talk about any kind of balanced diet or whatever food you have. You have two different energy sources. First is your carbohydrates and second is your fats. Now when you talk about carbohydrates, that's the primary source, and when you talk about fats, that is your secondary storage. Now how do you explain that even more in a layman's term? Just like you have a vehicle, in your vehicle you have a main tank and you have a reserve tank. So automatically when your bike or any kind of two-wheelers run out of fuel, what do? You switch to reserve mode, right? So reserve mode, in the reserve tank you have a stored separate emergency petrol that takes on and the vehicle runs smoothly. Just like that, whenever there is a lack of carbohydrates in the body, that is the primary source of energy, what happens? Automatically the body switches to reserve energy storage, that is your fat, and automatically it takes energy from that. So that serves also as a factor for determining the speed in your body. Okay, so when you're running, automatically if you're out of any kind of carbohydrates based energy, your body will run to the biochemical reserve or metabolic power to give more efficiency to the body. So that is how all these factors are responsible for carrying out the speed. So I hope you understood the various factors for speed. Let's move on to our next topic, that is physical factors determining endurance. Now we are talking about endurance. So what exactly do you mean by endurance? Endurance is how long you can carry out an activity, how long you can extend an activity with the same energy level. That shows your endurance power. Now I'm not talking about that situation where you're able to do the same activity for a longer period of time, but sometimes you will be very energetic, sometimes you will feel very low. So that's not the case. Here in the endurance, the energy level, the energy output that you use should be stagnant. It should be constant, then only the endurance will be taken in count. Okay, so what all are the factors that is responsible for endurance? First you have aerobic capacity, that is your cardio aerobic fitness. Next is lactic acid tolerance, and then you have movement economy and muscle composition. So aerobic capacity is how much oxygen that you take in. So how much oxygen you take in and how much work or the energy do you output. That ratio of that will show the aerobic capacity of a person. Then you have lactic acid tolerance. Automatically lactic acid gets formed when you do extensive activities. So how much your body is tolerant to that, how much your body balances out that. That is the second factor for endurance. Third is the movement economy. The movement economy is more like the budgeting of the energy. Just like you have monthly budget plan, just like you have yearly financial planning, just like that, when it comes to energy also, the body has to switch to different economic modes, and how your body controls different kind of energy expenditure in relation or in correlation with the activity, that shows as the movement of economy. For example, let's talk more in a layman's language here. So suppose you had one chapati, right? You give the same one quantity of chapati to 3 different people. Then you make them to run, or then you make them to do any kind of activity. Which person was able to do more activity with that particular one dose of carbohydrates intake, that is the chapati? So that will show the different kind of movement economy different people have. So movement economy is basically what? Movement economy is how much more activities can you do without much using of the energy. So how much calories do you really require to carry out a particular activity? That will show you movement economy. For example, any kind of activity that you take, for every activity certain calories are required, but the number of calories that you require might be different from the number of calories I require based on both of our movement economy. So how much a person is able to do an activity with the least required calories or least required energy, that shows that person's movement economy. Next you have muscle composition. We studied this in the earlier sections also, that is strength and speed. So basically muscle composition also is a factor for endurance. So with that you can see muscle composition is a common factor for all fitness related components. That is why it is important to have a proper muscle density or proper muscle composition. So the consumption of protein in your day-to-day life has to be very good in order to have a very good muscle composition. Now having given that tip at the end and having listed all the factors that is responsible for endurance, let's move on to our next factor, that is flexibility. Now we have studied flexibility as a factor in the speed, but now we will study flexibility more as a component and see what all factors are responsible for flexibility. So the first factor that is responsible for flexibility is muscle strength. So we have studied muscle strength earlier also. So your flexibility will basically depend on your muscle strength also, how much strong your muscles are. So in order to flex longer, you should have a proper density of muscle. Let's take an example of a rubber band, right? If you stretch a rubber band longer, if the rubber band's density, the thickness of the rubber band is very short, it will not stretch longer, it will break if you extend it too much longer. But if the thickness of the rubber band is more thick, what will happen? You can extend it longer. Just like that, compare that rubber band's thickness with the strength or with the mass or muscle strength or the composition of your muscle. So the more stronger your muscle is, the more you can flex, the more you can extend. So that's one factor of flexibility. Next, you have joint structure. Now joint structure also determines various physical components in your body or in your lifestyle. Just like that, when you talk about flexibility, joint structure also comes as a factor responsible for flexibility. And how is that? So everybody will have a separate anatomical system. Now you understand why we studied about anatomy earlier in the session, right? So it is important for you to understand anatomy in order to understand the joint structure and different kind of bones and different kind of other relation to that in the whole structuring or the functioning of the body. So joint structure when you talk about, so if your joints are very strong, automatically what will happen? You will not have any kind of cramps or you will not have any kind of slip sockets. So what will happen is that automatically when your joints are strong, your flexibility will increase, or your body will be able to flex a particular limb more longer if the joint structure is strong. Then you have age and gender. Now the flexibility of the body automatically changes over the period of time depending on the age and gender of a person. Now, over the period of time when the aging takes place, automatically the regeneration of cells in your body stops. Because of that, what happens? The new tissues that used to form in your muscles earlier when you were not old will stop. And what will happen? Automatically, your body is carrying forward the same tissue since the new tissues are not being developed, since the regeneration has stopped. So, those muscles will become weak and it will not be able to carry out any more flexible related activities. So, that's how age and gender also serves as a factor for flexibility. flexibility. Next you have stretchability of the muscles. We are talking directly about flexibility here, how long you can extend your muscle. So you might have noticed that many people who do yoga for the first time are also able to do yoga perfectly without any kind of problem, without any kind of issues. The flexibility is still like that person was practicing yoga for a long period of time, but the factor that is responsible over there is the genetics. So the genetics has gifted that person the flexibility from the childhood itself. Now when you talk about genetics and when you talk about flexibility, it doesn't mean that the person who has that from the genetics or from the birth itself is able to practice yoga. Now flexibility can be artificially developed through practice. So if you flex every day properly practicing yoga, or if you do splits every day slowly without breaking your muscles, slowly if you push yourself, now automatically due to practice your body's flexibility will take over and you will perform better. Okay, so just like I gave you the example of rubber band, so you can do this experiment also. If you take a small rubber band with a small diameter and if you put that on top of a vessel which has a larger diameter and you keep it for a long period of time, maybe 1 or 2 months, after 2 months you will see that the rubber band has extended to the diameter of the vessel on which you put that on, right? So just like that, automatically when you also stretch every day for a longer period of time, your body muscle will get adapted to that flex and it will become more flexible. That's how it improves your flexibility. Next, your internal environment. We are talking about the physiology, the functioning, the internal processing of your body. That also is directly responsible for this anatomical factor, that is flexibility. So what do you eat? How do you take care of your body? How do you take care of your physiology? All that also will be directly responsible for the flexibility of the body. Next, you have previous injury. Now if anybody had any kind of injury back in their past because of some unfortunate reasons, that also serves as a determinant factor for the flexibility in your body. Okay, so that's how all these factors are responsible for flexibility. So I hope you understood various factors and how it affects and determines the flexibility of a person in whatever activity they do. Having said that, we will wind up this session here. I hope you understood everything that we covered today. So before leaving, I'll try to give a quick recap. So what all things we studied today? We studied about the anatomy, we studied about the physiology, and we studied about various factors that are responsible for various anatomical and physiological related fitness components. So we studied about speed, we studied about endurance, we studied about aerobic activities, we studied about flexibility, we studied about various other factors. So all these things are important for your fitness. So I hope you understood all the concepts that we covered today. So I hope the knowledge will serve you academically and on the lifestyle basis too. Having said that, I'll see you in the next session of this chapter. Until then, this is me Rohit signing out. Until next time, goodbye.